Hello, everybody. Thank you for making it to the end of the day. Still having a bit of brain space to come along. I appreciate it's been a long first day for everyone, so I really appreciate everyone being here. My name is Lex. I am a designer. I work at a creative agency in Nottingham called Enzyme, and that means that my job is pretty much all-round designer. I don't have a kind of niche specialism like UX designer. I just prefer designer to sum up everything I do. I do work at a design agency, which means that I kind of have to be all of these things at once, really. And it explains why I haven't really had time to broaden my skills into becoming an actual developer either. I don't have time for that, as you can see. I can do a bit of code if I have to, but I have had, and I still very much have the privilege of working alongside some fantastic developers and engineers, and have done throughout my career of over 15 years now, which I hope makes me qualified to speak to you all today. But we are talking about design today, so at least I know I can talk about that. So UX today. Let's start at the beginning and discuss what UX is. So back in 1998, two guys, Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen, defined UX in an article called, funnily enough, The Definition of User Experience. And these two are kind of what I would call the grandfathers of UX design. And by that, I mean they're very foundational figures in pioneering a more human-centered approach to design. You might know Don Norman as the writer of the book, The Design of Everyday Things. This book is what some designers might call the UX Bible. I've read this book many a time. I've taken away quite a lot from it in my career. And then you might know Jacob Nielsen, most notably from this piece of work published in 1994, the 10 usability heuristics for user interface design. It still holds up over 30 years later, and I'm going to reference some of it in the talk today. So together, Don and Jacob founded the Nielsen-Norman Group. It's a fantastic online resource for all things UX, and where the article that I was referencing is posted. So back to that definition. I believe almost 28 years later, that this summary and the post that follows really still holds up. So they say user experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. They continue. So the first requirement for an exemplary user experience is to meet the exact needs of the customer without fuss or bother. Now, I think that this is interesting because we can often confuse the needs of the customer with the wants. They are two very, very different things. And that's usually where UX design comes in. We identify the needs and apply the right practices to find a solution. And a primary goal in UX design is aiming to make that experience as smooth as possible, so without fuss or bother. They continue. Next comes simplicity and elegance, that produce products that are a joy to own, a joy to use. Now, this is the bit that I don't 100% agree with, but I'll let them off, since this was published in the 90s, and things probably were a little bit more joyful to use in the 90s. So yeah, the thing I don't agree with here is the term joy, because I don't think that every product can be a joy to use. You know, I wouldn't call transferring a load of money to my solicitor through a banking app a joyful experience. But I do like the choice of words here with simplicity and elegance. It implies that more frictionless approach, which I believe is the right way to describe that exemplary user experience. Using banking as that example, so I use Monzo. I'm sure there are many people in here that do as well, yeah. It doesn't really have any direct customer service. It has no physical locations, but yet it continues to top bank rankings for personal and business accounts as well, actually. And the reason that I stick with them anyway is that they have a great user experience. I was lucky enough to get a bit of a peek behind the curtain on Monzo's app at all-day hay conference in Leeds a couple of years ago. 2 members of the team at Monzo did a joint talk where they spoke about their work improving the experience when sending a payment to a new person or a new account. And they improved that based on user needs. So they needed quicker ways to enter details like sort code and account number. They needed to verify details. They needed a confirmation step for reassurance, and less options when sorting payments into categories post-transaction. So these are all things I've experienced recently while using the app. And while I wouldn't call it a joyful experience, sending a load of money to a contractor to fix my leaky roof as well, it was simple and quick. So going back to that article, they continue to say that true user experience goes far beyond giving customers what they say they want or providing checklist features. Like I said previously, users might not know what they want. We need to focus on the needs. But what I do find interesting is that sometimes just asking customers what they want and delivering it is kind of where project research starts and ends sometimes. But we can do better than that. Lastly, they say, in order to achieve high-quality user experience in a company's offerings, there must be a seamless merging of the services of multiple disciplines, including engineering, marketing, graphical and industrial design, and interface design. So in short, to me, that means that everyone has to be on the same page. Everyone has to be user first, putting the needs of the user at the forefront throughout every aspect of that product and across the business. And that's why I, as a designer, wanted to come to a developer event to give this talk. I'd like to equip you with at least some small insight into UX design, but mostly to help reframe some thinking around being user first. Maybe it's not think like the user, but also think of the user in general too. There we go. So I want to go back to Don Norman's book to kind of get into the UX design side of things. I feel this would not be a talk about UX design if I didn't hark back to this and explain about a term that he coined in his book, something called the Norman door. If you haven't heard of this before, which you may well have done because it's tale as old as time in UX. But what is a Norman door? This is a good example of a Norman door. They are, at first glance, unclear if you need to push or pull to open. And that's primarily because the design prioritizes the aesthetic over the usability. For example, this door has handles on both sides. Is it immediately obvious whether it's a push or a pull from that fact? Not really. There is no visual affordance given to us. It's a try it and see and probably get it wrong the first time in order to find out. Essentially, yeah, it comes down to that design that doesn't prioritize clear usability. And take this as another example. Even with handles of sorts and written instructions, this example is still one of poor usability. For a start, the handles, if you can call them that, are practically panels. And panels usually indicate pushing. Plus, you can see it's exactly the same on the other side. There is no immediate visual cue to indicate that difference. I might be talking a bit of shit for a minute because it does say pull on it in words, which is fantastic, but not if I'm not an English speaker. And to let you in on a little secret, actually, more often than not, people don't read. They just don't. They'll miss it entirely. So this is, unfortunately, another Norman door. A better design, what you would call good UX design, and not Norman door, would be a panel to push and a handle or a bar to pull. These cues give us immediate context of what we need to do, and our brains can very, very quickly come to that conclusion without needing to read or to test the function and fail. Through observing user behavior and understanding how people interact with that door, we can create a solution that satisfies both the push and the pull instance. And that is UX design. And in a similar way, you can apply this logic to a common digital application, such as a link. Now, this is apparently a link. It says it's clickable, sure, but If it was amongst other written content, that might not be immediately obvious. So maybe we give it an underline. Cool, that's helpful. This is a common pattern for links, and we're starting to see some more consideration of the experience here. Maybe we give it a different color. Fantastic. That can help make it stand out against non-links and gives us helpful indication. But if we really need this to stand out amongst other content, maybe we can go a bit further. Maybe a button's a more appropriate way of capturing the attention and making that link more discoverable. Disclaimer before I move on, not all links need to be buttons. Some are fine as links. It's very dependent on the use case. I'm not telling you to turn all links into buttons, please. Yeah, similarly to that Norman door, we're kind of understanding that usability issue here, and we tailor the design to fit the requirements and reduce friction. It can be very common to confuse the UX, the user experience, and the UI, the user interface. You might often see the combination of UX/UI used in tandem, especially for job roles. And the reason is simple, they do overlap. How things look does have an influence on the usability. That's kind of the design part of UX design, I guess. And that button exercise is a case where the visual appearance influences that user experience. So while they are very different practices within design, they do work together a lot of the time. You've probably seen some mildly incorrect graphics that try and explain this difference. I mean, yes, I can sort of see what they're getting at here, but generally, I guess these are more examples, both of UI, and then these are examples that show the user experience. So you can see the left side, bad user experience, unless that's what you enjoy, and the right side, good UX. I think that is what the original graphic was trying to convey, essentially. But what that also conveys is that elements of the user interface do affect the functionality and experience. So if we look at these two in terms of activities and practices within each discipline, we can see how that all comes together to create that final product. I did a talk last year at NDC London as well called Design for Developers, and I probably should have put more distinction into the title because all I talked about was things that fell under the UI side, creating a color palette, typography techniques, graphics, images, icons, and things that all fell under that high fidelity final visual design. But UX design spans a lot of different practices and activities that mostly come before that, ones that hinge more on research and understanding needs, observing user behaviors, and problem solving at that low fidelity stage. And while today I do want to try and focus more on tips that cover that UX side, inevitably we're going to fall into some of the UI patterns at some point because there is that blurry overlap. But if we pull out the UX design side on its own, I want to focus on some of those earlier practices in here. So as a designer, you should be starting with the research, understanding your audience, observing their behaviors, finding out what their needs are that align with what you're making. Unfortunately, to create an optimal user experience, you can't really skip that part. Engaging directly with an audience is the best way to gain that insight into their needs and behaviors and to develop a product that is ultimately going to work for them. But as is all too common, we haven't always got the budget, the expertise, or most commonly the time for it within projects. And design is often the department that gets squeezed first in these things anyway. So with all that being said, what can we really apply practically after today's talk if we can't always do the research up front? Well, there are some things that that come up pretty universally throughout my experience in these early stages of UX design, when we're trying to understand the people that interact with our product. And when we delve into that user brain and how it thinks, there are very common threads and patterns that appear. We can learn from decades and centuries old habits and behaviors that are built into human nature, and some that are more recent and have evolved through the digital age too. You might have seen this image as another bad example to help explain the UX UI thing. This image shows that the path designed isn't the way that users prefer to travel. It's a wonderful visual representation here with a secondary path created across the grass. And it makes me think, is there any behavior more human than that? Well, it turns out, no. This is a very deep-rooted human behavior that crops up in urban areas all over the world. And it's so common that it has a name. It's called a desire path, which is beautiful, I think. They're a wonderful example of repeated behaviors that humans just display universally. So this type of behavior is where I'd like our focus to be today. Repeated, common, and very built-in human behaviors. Practical tips that can be followed without a full UX design process, but that are also useful alongside one too. As developers, there's no disadvantage to being on the same wavelength as the designers who you work with. It is a superpower to share that middle ground and incorporate some design understanding into your skill set. So let's take a look at some of those common themes and behaviors when we're designing user first. So not a meme I thought I'd be referencing in 2026, but here we are. The one human thing I find to be universally true when I'm designing for any project is that time is precious. We do not want to spend it on stuff that we don't need to do or don't want to do. It's a thing that comes up anytime I do user research, I'm doing personas, empathy mapping, user testing. Lack of time. Oh, that's not come up. There we go. Lack of time is it's always written on a Post-it and up on a board when I'm doing that research phase. Plus, what compounds that problem is that human attention spans have gone to shit. Everything's fighting for our attention these days. Screens surround us all day, social media scrolling us into oblivion. I'm sure there's probably someone in the audience right now checking an email or a notification. I'm not blaming you. It's one of those consequences of where we are in this day and age. And it's the end of the day and we all want to go get a drink, so it's cool. I'm not holding it against you. But regardless, no time, zero attention span. As much as I hate it, we have to design for it or around it. So in light of that, one common thing that we know about most users nowadays is that they don't really read. They scan for content. They hunt for information they're looking for by skimming a page and looking for clues. Research has shown that users spend less than 3 seconds scanning content before they either find what they're looking for or they dip. So if your design is not optimized for the scan reading person, then it's unlikely that they're going to find what they need, and they'll leave frustrated. So how do we design for this behavior? Back to our old pal, Jacob Nielsen. Back in 2006, he observed some eye-tracking visualizations of users reading web pages. And while the study is old, it has been followed up in 2017, which actually was still ages ago now. But basically, it confirmed the findings were still true across various screen sizes, including phones. So what was found in that study that there's a very common pattern that the majority of users followed when browsing content on a screen, and that is the F-shaped reading pattern. Now, it was observed in these studies as a route that scan readers followed for efficiency, and it's named as such due to the pattern that it makes from the eye tracking. So users start that top left, they scan across, maybe read a headline, they move back down, scan across until they hit another stopping point, like a subheading, and they continue that pattern down and find natural points to stop and read across. It works well for those who scan because it's an efficient way of locating the information they want. It's not the only scanning method, but it is the most common one for written content-heavy pages. And it's a great example of that shared, common human behavior that we've trained our little brains to do. There are some other techniques for scan reading as well, and that all comes down to the type of content on the page. So there's a Z pattern, which is more common for layouts that don't hinge on as much written content, but incorporate things like imagery or buttons into the layout. There's a spotted pattern, so that's usually users are skipping the big chunks of info and are very focused on something specific, like a link or numbers or an icon or something very specific. And then there's a marking pattern. This is one of my favorite ones. It's when the users keep their eyes focused in one place on the screen as they scroll or swipe through content, very common on mobile on there. There are others as well. I won't bore you with them all. But generally, knowing the more common techniques can be quite helpful when creating page layouts. It does get a little bit cart before the horse. No, chicken and egg, that's the phrase I'm looking for. Where when we know these patterns, we design for them, and then that reinforces them. But I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel today, so nice to lean on these, really. And then other things that we can implement alongside these layouts. First of all, somewhere to begin is a really good way to help guide users, reduce that cognitive load. And by cognitive load, I mean the amount of mental effort being used in that working memory. I feel like I've referenced it a couple of times so far. And in design, it's significant because if a user interface is too complex, it's going to overload the user's mental capacity. And it makes it difficult for them to navigate because they've got too many things to contemplate. So our aim is to minimize that cognitive load and make products more user-friendly. So that starting point on the page is really important. We need to create a bit of a focal point. And if we're on a web page, for example, that might be the logo or a header image. If we're on a simpler screen, it might just be a large title. So that depends what you're designing for. But giving users a way to kind of identify where they are and a starting point for that reading pattern is helpful. And then that's followed up by applying visual hierarchy. So what I mean by that is using visual techniques to create an order and structure to our content and help those scan readers when they're judging what's important on the page. So one way to do that when we're looking at heavy written content is scale. It's a really powerful way to apply that hierarchy. And we see this in the very common technique of different heading sizes. So an H1, large heading, it's going to be the title of the page most of the time. It describes the entirety of the contents below it, and it's also a great starting point. Medium-sized heading is going to help us identify content that's in the paragraphs below, and then third level sub kind of content in there. Most importantly, that hierarchy and using headings really helps users scan for words rather than having to dig into the paragraphs of text. This is me trying to work out how to solve a Rubik's Cube lately. I still haven't done it. It's important to remember that the first thing on the page also is not always the thing that people will read first. This kind of eyebrow header, as I would call it, is the same size as the third heading, and it's definitely not the first thing that you read on that page. So hierarchy is more than just the order of things, it's also that prominence. As well as heading styles, there's some other simple typographic things we can help scan readers find the things that they need to find with these kind of visual rest stops. So bullet points is a really common way, or in this example, this is numbered bullets. Very common technique to make content just more digestible, easy to read, but that visual style can really help users locate words when they're scanning. In paragraphs as well, we can use a bold weight of the font at selective points in the text to help pull out some key information for scan readers. And I say selective points because if you're going to use a bold, make sure that you're just kind of choosing one thing in the paragraph. Don't go bolding every other word. As the saying goes, if everything's bold, then nothing is. So being selective is important. And then last is the spacing element. So in particular here is paragraph spacing. This is where we have natural breaks between and at the end of paragraphs. This just helps break that content up into shorter sections and give pause when scanning. And spacing and whitespace is generally a very powerful tool in UX design, something that we can be quite guilty of not doing and trying to fit everything in, trying to fit things into that first view of the screen, typically called above the fold. And you've probably heard the term above the fold. It came from newspaper printing, where you would prioritize content that would appear on the top half of the newspaper because they'd usually appear folded in half. It's not quite as clear-cut for digital use, especially due to the different screen sizes that we use, but generally, the term above the fold gets used to describe that first visible view of a screen. And sometimes we see lots of information crammed into this in the hopes that users are going to take it all in. That is not how users scan. Sure, let's keep our starting point there and potentially a couple of other scannable points high up. It's still important to help kick off that reading pattern, but a minimal approach to design isn't just cool, it's very helpful. Stuffing things into that screen has never been great. It creates a busy layout and scan readers will struggle. So removing clutter and spacing things out can help put more focus on certain elements. One of my favorite ways to use whitespace when designing for larger screens is to ensure that containers for larger paragraphs of text don't span the huge width of a large screen. Without a narrow container, it means that users have to read all the way across the page, and then when they get to the end, they have to go all the way back, which sounds like a really small inconvenience, but it just adds more to that cognitive load, and it can lead to users losing their space, losing their place in the reading. A narrow container can help alleviate that problem. It makes the lines shorter, and then there's less distance for the user's eye to travel across the page. So that large white space now on the right of the page becomes very important. And sure, then I end up opening the floodgates for good-for-nothing stakeholders to say, hey, let's fill that space. And I end up putting an image or an advert over there at some point. But regardless, at least the container is more user-friendly for a reader. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with leaving that space open and blank either. So, next fundamental need from a user, just make it obvious. We touched on that cognitive load in the previous section. It's a very important part of UX to reduce decision-making for users. If you're looking for some further reading material on UX design, this is my UX Bible. Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. Essentially, it's another way of saying, just make it obvious. And Steve makes some great points around the cognitive load aspect. He says, every question mark adds to our cognitive workload, distracting our attention from the task at hand. So we have to make things as obvious as possible for the user without raising too many what ifs, what does this do, where is this going? Don't make me think, as he says. If we go back to our example from earlier, here's our link. It used to look like this, now it looks like this. And while it's obvious that it's a link now, it could still do with improvements. It's not obvious what that link's going to do or where it's going to take us. So we could change that text. Okay, slightly better, but still not a good indication of where we're about to go. Learn more. Okay, let's change that. Cool, much better. Learn about dinosaurs. It's clear where this is going to click through to. It's going to be a cool page about dinosaurs, and I'm going to learn about that. Gives the user confidence in their decision when they're going to click that. Gives them confidence that they're not going to have to go scan it and come back. Cool. And that's an example of using clear language. You're spelling out the action to the user. You're using words that describe the link's destination or the action taken when clicking it. But don't go overboard with it. Don't go crazy. Concise is just as important as clear. So, yeah, that's a bit too much. And that won't fit on a phone either. You'll have 2 lines of the button. So let's look at another example of this problem, but with a bit more context. So say we've chosen to delete a file. We have a box that appears when we choose to take this action. Question here, would you like to delete this file? It's okay, it's fine. But what about those buttons? They're like the Norman Door problem to me. Is it immediately obvious which one is going to do what I want? Not really. We also have a tiny little disclaimer after the buttons that say that this is going to be permanent and I can't undo the situation. Oof. It's functional. It probably works fine, but we're missing that finesse that just makes it a little bit more user-friendly. So let's have a look at improving that. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's be really clear with that language. Are you sure Now, this modal is a very deliberate point of friction. We're confirming a choice because it's permanent, and we're making that immediately clear to the user by saying, are you sure? And B, we've moved that word permanently out of the footnote and into that main question. It's very clear. And then the buttons, we're using clearer language on the buttons. Delete file. It's going to delete the file. Do not delete. Again, we're not going to delete the file. So we've done that, and we've also moved the primary action to the right-hand side. It's a bit more typical of that reading pattern, and in this case, that's the Z pattern. And it's just a more common practice in general. And then lastly, we've applied another technique to help make it obvious and to not make the user think. Our primary button, the one that we think is likely to be chosen, is red. And we've chosen red as it has connotations of cancelling and deleting. But more than that, more than the color, it's filled to make it the more prominent option. The secondary button, the one that we think will be less likely, because the user hasn't initiated that action, that appears in an outline. It's not as prominent as the primary action, and it makes an obvious differentiation between the two. And this is an example of using contrast in order to emphasize or make something clear. And contrast is a design principle that we can typically implement in order to pull focus for users to something important. A real test of the contrast is if I've blurred this to, hurts my eyes, but you can tell me what the delete action is now from that, I imagine, in comparison to the other one where it might not be as clear. So that's, I guess, test at first glance. Word of warning, though, do not make people jump through hoops to find an option that you're going to give them. This can be quite common when a company offers an option that they don't really want you to click. This is called a deceptive pattern. So here's an example of one of those from the ever ethical company, Amazon. So this is me trying to cancel my Amazon Prime membership. They don't want you to cancel, despite it being your absolute right to. And all the buttons here are equal. They're not in any particular logical order. And in fact, this is just the first step of many where they try and convince you to stay. And the worst thing about this is that it's deliberately designed that way. Because you can't convince me that one of the largest companies in the world is hiring incompetent designers that don't know this. This is how any sensible designer with morals would do it. But yeah, I'll move on before I get mad at Amazon. That's not what we're here for. So design at its core, it is essentially a way of visualizing data or content. And over the years, our brains have created some ways of interpreting that in order to make it a bit easier. So the next common observation is that our brains just naturally group stuff together. So we can use that and we can design for it. There are a set of principles we're taught as designers called Gestalt principles. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And they come from Gestalt psychology that was founded in the early 20th century. So these are some of those principles, not all of them. And they explain some of the ways that our brains like to make visual connections and group stuff. I want to pick out 3 examples that are quite common in digital design. So the first is proximity. So using the space or the lack of space between things can help make those connections in our brain. Things that are close together are likely to be perceived as part of the same group, where elements that are spaced further apart will be in separate groups, as demonstrated here. This is another example that teaches us that whitespace is the best. So take a very content-heavy page, such as this. We have that kind of large area at the top, some of these longer boxes, some of these side boxes, and another bit. The spacing between everything is quite consistent, but does it help differentiate or group any of the content? Not really. So if we apply that principle of proximity, there we go. Ooh. Sorry, guys. We can use spacing to naturally group areas. In fact, I'll go back. We can use spacing there to really just naturally group these things together. And this is just a wireframe, but it's clear that these things belong together now. Then there's the principle of similarity. So this is where the human brain perceives objects that look similar as belonging to a group as well. So if we go back to our example, if we zoom in, this group of elements all seems to follow a similar structure and look, and therefore they likely belong together. If we take that into the UI, they'll likely use the same component, just the content will be slightly different. So our brain is not only relying now on the proximity, but also the kind of style and layout of these as well. And then continuity. This refers to how our brain naturally organizes visual elements in a continuous or uninterrupted line or pattern. So we go back to our example and look at the top of the page. This is where our wireframe shows a menu. Let's turn that into actual text. So here, we're guiding the user's eye in a certain direction via that continuity. We're enhancing that readability, but also telling our brain that these are all a natural group of things that belong together. And it's a continuation, actually, of the last two principles, proximity and similarity. You know, they all follow the same style, there's the same space between them, and now they all live on this lovely natural line of continuousness. And then furthermore, drop-down menus can also demonstrate the power of continuity. They follow natural lines down and across, and that relates back to our reading patterns as well from earlier. If you would like to learn more about these principles, because I've just whizzed through some, this is a fantastic resource. It is lawsofux.com. You'll find some more info on Gestalt principles, but also about other kind of common patterns in UX design as well. Worth a look, I like it. Moving on. So users, they need feedback. They need indications that they're doing the right thing or help when they're not. And in terms of reducing that cognitive load, we don't want to add unnecessary decision-making to them, but we also don't want to confuse them, and we don't want to leave them lost or not knowing what to do next. So in the digital world, it's important to offer that kind of feedback similarly to how they might get in the physical world. So one problem I see quite often is when a user takes an action and they're a bit unsure if anything's happening. It's important to give them some feedback that their action is actually doing something, especially when that response is going to take a little while to happen. We need to fill that fuzzy gap in the middle with some form of reassurance. They might get frustrated or confused otherwise. And it might be something as simple as a small loading animation to indicate that something, anything, is happening in the background. Giving the user that feedback means they can be assured that the action has been taken and they're just waiting on the response. Other techniques here can include like skeleton screens, progress bars, even just a simple bit of text, say, loading. And then there are some instances where users take an action and find themselves in a failed state. So there are different examples of these states. This is an empty state from Google. In this state, there are no results to show. I've gone to communities, there's nothing there. And there is a clear message that states this. Now imagine if I went there and this state displayed nothing. Big, large, empty space. It could indicate that there's nothing there, but it could also easily confuse the user into thinking that they're waiting for results to appear as well. So showing something instead of absolutely nothing is a good way of giving the user that immediate feedback that they've reached the page and confirms that there's nothing there. Error states, again, another good example, and we commonly see this on the web with a 404. This is another example from Google. I think this is quite an old one, to be fair. I don't particularly love it. To all of us, the requested URL was not found on the server makes complete sense, but it might not make sense to the everyday web user. Plus, following that up with "that's all we know" sounds really unhelpful. This is a great place where we can use language as a UX tool. So instead of being really technical with the messaging, we make it clearer, we make it helpful, we make it human. We use plain language. And it doesn't have to go overboard. I often see really playful or funny examples of 404 text where it's not necessary. A simple sorry can be great. And then a bit of signposting the user to either go back or towards another link is fine. Avoid being clever with it here. Sometimes it's more confusing, to be honest. And it can make the user feel guilty or like they've made a mistake. It depends on your audience. I'm not saying don't try, but a lot of the times it can make them feel like they've made a mistake. And the thing is that users do make mistakes. They make them all the time, and we should let them. Supporting users when they're taking big actions enhances the user's experience, because sometimes they'll hesitate to take an action if they're not sure what's going to happen or they can't undo the situation. And we can achieve this in UX design by introducing that intentional friction, like we did and we saw with the delete action there. Confirmation stages are a great way to do this. I actually came across one this weekend, a few days ago. I was entering in a Pokemon TCG regional tournament in Birmingham. And I didn't want to play the last round because I'd done terribly and I wasn't going to make it into day 2. So I decided to drop from the tournament. So they have an online tournament system, and when you hit initiate drop in that yellow at the top, you are then asked twice to input information to confirm that drop. So while that meant more time spent for me to confirm it and confirm it again, it was actually quite a good user experience because it stops accidental drops, which can be quite devastating for competitors. At least competitors that were doing better than I was anyway. One of my favorite examples of allowing users to make mistakes is from Gmail. This isn't a confirmation step, but an opportunity to undo. So when you send an email, there's a small window of time that Google holds the email before fully sending it. And in that time, a notification appears that lets you undo. It's not actually undoing it or unsending the email. You can't do that. But it just hangs on before sending it for a few seconds. It's a really small thing and a small moment of care for the user. It lets them make a mistake. And it's all for a great user experience. It's the very, very small things that users will continue to use your product for. Being the user's guide, sometimes users need a little bit of help or a bit of indication where they are on a journey, especially for a product that might be quite information or content heavy, in which case we can put in some practice and some stuff to help them out. So, like I said, the users don't always enter at your ideal start point. If you're on a website, they don't always enter through the homepage. Sometimes they're flung into the depths of your product or website. So it's important to let them know where they are first, a digital representation of the "you are here" sign. And we can do this by ensuring that the page or screen is clearly marked with some sort of marker, like a heading or a title or an image that makes that immediately clear. We've touched on that before as well with the good start point. And then we need to consider some signposting to offer the user help with what to do next. That's my biggest fan. So one example of signposting there is breadcrumbs. Aptly named after the Hansel and Gretel tale, breadcrumbs show the path backwards. And they are especially helpful for those users that have entered your product at a deeper page rather than at the start. It can also be very helpful from an information architecture point of view so that users can get to grips with the way your product's structured. So a dense database of content can really benefit from this kind of navigation backwards as well. And there are some less tech-savvy users who actually need a bit of a reset as well when they're browsing. A back to home, back to the start again can be really useful. So breadcrumbs can offer that, but we can also see that on websites, for example, by clicking the logo, taking them back to the homepage. Very helpful ways of getting back. Another example of guiding or signposting users that we saw earlier. Let's look at this empty state. This shows an example of task-driven signposting. So where you're helping the user navigate to the assumed next stage within their flow. Create community here is the very clear next step for the user. This example shows also, if I go back, there's a bit of a nice "you are here" with that menu with the highlighted place where we are as well. But there is a danger when it comes to task-driven signposting, so I want to bring that up. Stakeholders and clients that I've worked with in the past have been really problematic with this because they want to stuff in as many calls to action or links that the users might want, maybe, as primary links. So coming back to that cognitive load aspect, we only want to give the user kind of 1 or 2 next steps if possible. Otherwise, you can land that user into that paradox of choice thing. So the paradox of choice happens when you offer your user too many choices and it backfires. People often think that providing lots of options might appeal to people more, when in reality it can often overwhelm users, and they end up in this choice paralysis. It's not always the case, but in cases where users are unfamiliar with the options or they find them difficult to evaluate, it can just overwhelm really and have a negative effect on their experience. So consider which options might be the most important and only offer those. One of my final observations that I want to make, and I'm not going to go into huge detail because many others do this better than I will, but I think it's very important to bring up. Accessibility. It is very important. Digital inclusion and accessible products offer a better user experience, period. Not just for those with accessibility issues. This can commonly be seen with this curb cut effect. So this was coined by disability students and activists in the 70s. They added curb cuts to the sidewalks in Berkeley to make access easier for those in wheelchairs. And they discovered that it also helped people with prams, bikes, trolleys, deliveries, and more. A digital example of this would be videos that include captions. Subtitles, well, they're a feature designed for deaf people or people who are hard of hearing, but they also benefit people with ADHD, with auditory processing disorder, people who want to watch a video without sound because they're sat on the bus. In short, it's inclusive for everyone. And you might have seen this graphic before. It's from Microsoft's Inclusivity Handbook. And what it demonstrates is that things that impair abilities, such as touch, sight, hearing, can oftentimes be permanent, but in many other occasions can also be temporary or even situational. For example, with touch, a permanent situation could be that someone only has one arm or the use of one arm. Temporary is where they might have an injury like a broken arm, and situational could be where they're a new parent that has to keep hold of a baby. In all instances here, an accessible option benefits everyone on that scale. And this is very close to home for me. This is my partner, Jeff. He has had a paralyzed left arm for 15 years, long before I met him anyway. And it delights me when I get to see accessible products and solutions that might not have been directly made for him and his disability, but that work perfectly. Jeff loves to game on the PC, but he can't use a mouse and keyboard at the same time like I can. So he has this mouse, which is by a company called Razer. It has a larger than usual amount of mappable keys on the side where his thumb is on the mouse. So he's assigned WASD, E, Q, space, whatever buttons he needs on there. And he can play just as well as everyone else and still better than me every time as well. And what I love about this product is that it was very likely not designed for someone that can just use one hand. It was created to enhance every gamer's experience. But like I said, this is not an accessibility class. I just want to bring up accessibility in the context of UX before I wrap up. 3 general rules I have, though. If you are blessed with vision, make text large enough to read, make sure the color contrast doesn't suck, and if you're not, use alt text for stuff that people can't see. 3 very simple things. But for a better look on how to do accessibility right, Amy's speaking tomorrow on that subject, so do go and check out her talk on that. Bring us into the home stretch here, and why I mentioned accessibility as well. I want to come back to the point about this talk maybe having the wrong name. I want us all not just to think like a user, but think of the user. It's 2026 now. Holy crap. I still think that we're doing a shit job of UX design. Sorry, I hope I'm allowed to swear, because I've already done it a few times. But yes, the user isn't just being forgotten. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The user is absolutely the point, but it's not that their needs are being prioritized. No. It's that they're generally just being exploited. 10 years ago, this article was published. I don't know if any of you have read it. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. This piece describes a vision of what 2030 could be like, with themes such as ownership turned to access and privacy loss just accepted as the norm. This was written 10 years ago. It was not intended as a literal prediction, but as a discussion point about the direction that society and technology might take. Many, many readers found this narrative as dystopian, especially that idea of no ownership, surveillance, and AI-managed lives. And 10 years later, it really does look like where we're heading. Users are being sold the dream of a better life, when actually they're losing out and being exploited. In September, Merriam-Webster tweeted the definition of the term enshittification. It was also named Word of the Year by Macquarie Dictionary in 2024. Now, I don't know which dictionary is most legit, but what I can agree on is that enshittification is a phenomenon large enough to warrant an entry in every dictionary. I saw this TikTok a few weeks ago, and it truly hammered home the awful experiences in a lot of products right now. I'm going to play it for you.
Guys, I got a Dyson today, and I unboxed it, and I was using it earlier. And then this is a screen. Number one, why is there a screen on my Hoover? And then it kept being like, download the app. Why does my Hoover need an app? Then I was like, what will the app do? And it was like, collect data. What does Dyson want with information about what I'm sucking up off my floors? I don't want to download another app.
There really doesn't have to be an app for everything. So this hammered home for me. Creating a great user experience is incompatible with enshittification. The two can't exist at the same time. Even if that Hoover is the absolute pinnacle of sucking technology, its experience is automatically worsened by including an app sign-up, for God's sake. So I want tech to be enjoyable again. It used to be fun. Now it's all doom scrolling and subscription services and influencers. But I have hope. I really do have hope. There is a good reason why DVD and CD sales are on the rise again. Owning physical media is a rebellion against the enshittification. But more importantly than making tech enjoyable, I think there's a case for let's make tech useful again. It feels like it's also going to shit too. Let's make stuff easier. Let's use tech for good. Remember when the world was going to hell a few years back and people needed to go digital pretty damn fast? The unsung digital hero of 2020 was undoubtedly the QR code, something that designers were ready to let die, but it turned out to be very useful for those less technology savvy in a world where we weren't allowed to leave the house, except for in the UK, where we were allowed one daily outdoor exercise time. And a lot of the time, we used that to go to the pub, but when we got to the pub, we needed to scan a QR code because the UK had the test and trace service, so they could try and trace back instances of COVID. Fun. It was a fun time. But this experience has stuck around, the QR code. An example here in the form of QR codes being used for table service. It's just a link, but it's a quick, user-friendly way of accessing a link in the real world. It eliminates that error of typing a URL in wrong. So cool. But I want to end on one last example of good, useful, and even life-saving UX design that I observed recently. It's actually for a company that I don't actually like, but here we go. It's some good news, something, again, very close to home for me that's happened recently. So at the start of the year, my old home of Aberdeenshire in the northeast of Scotland was hit with a very bad snowstorm. There was loads of roads blocked, and many people were snowed in for the better part of a week, including my parents. I follow this Facebook group. I don't even live there anymore, but I follow this Facebook group called Fubar News, where people from Aberdeenshire post updates similar to other community groups on Facebook. In times of toughness, this group is really good at offering fast updates on situations and a community spirit like no other. Aberdeenshire always has bad weather, snow, fallen trees, power cuts. It all gets reported on this page. And over the worst couple of days of this storm, where the snow was coming down really heavy, blocking roads. This was a very common post on Fubar News. Can anybody help? There's cars stuck here. Anyone with a tractor, can any farmer get me out? And it often came with a map, screenshot like this, or a postcode. And the comments were very interesting to see. I apologize for the rubbish quality on here. I hope you can all read. But the gist of the comments were, that's too vague. No one's going to be able to find you, which was correct. These are really rural, long roads. But a solution that was often discussed in the comments was, tell us your what 3 words. Now, I'm not a huge fan of what 3 words. I think they have some problematic stuff with proprietary things that they've done in the past. I always kind of thought, why not use coordinates as the standard instead? But this example of fellow Aberdonians stuck in the snow made me rethink it. It is all about the user experience. If you're not familiar with what 3 words, it's a service where they create a 3-word address for every 3-meter square around the world. So wherever you are, the location has a combination of 3 unique words to locate you. And yes, you could use coordinates for this exact same purpose, but that wasn't the point. Do you want to find, decipher, and potentially get lengthy coordinates wrong when you're in a perilous situation or filled with panic, stuck out in a snowstorm? Or do you want 3 common words to pinpoint your location accurately enough to be rescued? These were everyday folk looking for the quickest possible route, and the decent user experience of what 3 words solved it. They were all rescued pretty swiftly, as were countless others by local farmers and rescue teams, and that was down to good user experience. So that's my good news story to wrap up. I wanted to end on something nice because there's been some despair in this. And I haven't covered anything that's absolutely groundbreaking in design today, and that is by design. To reiterate, I mostly want this talk to inspire you all to just think like or think of the user. I hope you've had a great day at NDC. Thank you. Feel free to fire me any design questions you might have. You can find me at my website here or over on Blue Sky or at the after party tomorrow as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.